Now it's time for Perspective, and as France 24 marks today the 80th liberation of the Auschwitz camp from the Nazis, on today's Perspective we're going to tell you the story of one of the most moving tales of the Holocaust that I ever heard. So much so that the story was turned into a film, One Life, just over a year ago, starring Anthony Hopkins in the main role. It's the story of how, thanks to one man, Nicholas Winton, and his small team, 669 mostly Jewish children were rescued from Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia, as it was then, just before the beginning of World War II. Now, the story went largely unrecognised for years, until a British television programme in the 1980s, That's Life, managed to find an entire audience of those whose lives had been saved thanks to Winton. And Winton himself was surprised as he turned around to discover every single other person there owed their lives to him. Well, first of all, let's watch a little clip of the film.
30 seconds to on air!
Okay, and you are just here.
Good night. Sit farther back.
Now, an extraordinary story about a young man who many years ago visited Prague. What he found there were thousands of refugees at the mercy of Hitler's imminent invasion.
Do you ever think about the children and what happened to them?
I bet you got some stories.
That's really not about me.
We are working to evacuate these children by train to safety in Britain.
Why are you doing this, Mr. Winton?
Because I may be able to do something about it. I must.
Go, now.
Nikki, you must know we cannot save them all. You have to forgive yourself that.
Yeah, some of the trailer for the film there, where Nicholas Winton himself died in 2015 at the age of 106. But his son, Nick Winton, who tells his story to ensure it stays alive, joins us now on the programme. Thanks very much for being with us. I mean, it really is such an incredible story. Tell us, first of all, why your father, with the help of a few close others as well, decided to act, do you think, to save these children's lives?
Well, he was, although born in England, his parents were German Jewish. He was trained in banking in Germany in the 30s and saw what was going on in Germany, and his extended family would have told him stories, and he had photos of Hitler Youth. He was very aware of how the German Jews were being blamed for the economic crisis that was going on there. So I think he was more aware than most of the threat that they posed, and when the British government thought they could avoid war by giving Sudetenland to Hitler, he felt that he wouldn't stop there. So I think he was probably more connected with the people who were at risk than most others.
But it was a very courageous thing for him and the people who were working with him to actually do. And it was difficult, wasn't it? It was very difficult to get, for example, the documentation that they needed to get the children out. The film shows that very much. Yeah,
it was a very daunting task. I mean, for each child, he had to find a foster family that would look after them. He had to arrange for the British Home Office to give them a visa to immigrate temporarily. He had to find a guarantor to provide £50 to repatriate them, which is about, well, in today's money, it's about £4,500 per child. And then the visas were used to get an exit permit from the Gestapo when they marched in and took over administrating Czechoslovakia in the spring of '39.
And
so yeah, it was quite an undertaking.
That's what happened back then, but the recognition for it came a lot later, didn't it, during the 1980s. One of those major points was that That's Life television programme, and many people watching the television that night. I have to say, I was one of them. I remember being there, watching that programme back in 1988 and feeling so moved by that. No, I'm not too young. I was 18, in fact, at the time. I mean, it was just amazing, wasn't it, the way that they launched into that story, and he had no idea that it was coming up, only to find out that he was actually sitting next to one of those children that he'd rescued, Vera Gissing.
Yeah. I mean, he was asked, why did you keep it a secret for so long? 50 years. And he said, well, I didn't keep it a secret. I just didn't talk about it. And there's such a difference between his view, which is he did it because it needed to be done, rather than some younger people today who want to be famous without really doing very much. For him, it wasn't about recognition. It was about, it was what anybody would have done in his view. He was just an ordinary man rising to a challenge that needed attention.
But it became something, didn't it, that so many people who'd watched that programme got caught up in, that next week they invited him back on the programme, and the presenter Esther Ranson asked, does anyone in this room owe their lives to Nicholas Winton? And the entire audience stands up, and it's amazing that they kept in touch, didn't they, a lot of them, for many years after the programme.
Do you know what, Stuart? I give talks about this as a great example of leadership. And every time I show that clip, I get a lump in my throat, because that's when the story, to me, became real. Before then, it was just a story. But when people stand up and you think, they wouldn't have been there if Pa and his team hadn't made that effort to try and find them safe, to get them to safety. It's very moving, very moving. And yes, he did. He made some great friends with some of the children he saved. And for them, of course, many of them had no idea how they came to be in the United Kingdom or wherever they ended up. They had no idea until this. And then suddenly they had a link with their past, and he became like a surrogate father to them.
He never saw himself as a hero, though. I mean, he was the man at the centre of it, but there were other people around him as well that helped an awful lot as well.
He was very embarrassed at the attention and the awards that he was given. He felt that, he was, in his view, he was never in danger. He may have been the instigator of the project, but the people who were really in danger were the people still running the office in Prague when the Germans started to prepare to invade Poland. And it got much more unsafe for them there. But I think because he was, firstly, he was the instigator of the project. And secondly, when the story broke in 1988, he was the only one still alive. So the press loved to have a hero to attach a story to, and he felt very uncomfortable about it. And when he was asked about, the project, although he did save 669 children, he always remembered the 250 children who were sitting on a train ready to leave on the 1st of September 1939, which was the day that Hitler marched into Poland and the borders to Germany were closed. The train never left the station, and almost every one of those 250 children died. And he always reflected, it must be difficult, mustn't it, Stuart? If he'd worked a little bit harder, if he'd done it 2 days sooner, 250 more children would have survived.
Of course, the world today is marking and remembering what happened at the Holocaust with that 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. How important is it, do you think, for people to remember? How important do you think your father would have thought it was for people to remember what happened?
Well, sadly, one of his quotes repeated from other people in history is, we never learn anything from history. And it seems that we're talking about remembering, and yet exactly the same things are going on in the world still today. And it makes me wonder what we have to do in order to actually learn and do something different.
And do you think that's how your father would have felt as well?
Oh, yes.
Very much so. It's great to have you on the programme.
Tragic, the episode in the Second World War when so many people were murdered. And to see that much the same things still go on today is even more tragic. So, yes, I do hope that some people will give pause for thought and maybe take a different course of action and look after each one of the people who are at risk today.
Nick Winton, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Good to have you with us to remember that story and give thanks, really, to your father and to those other people as well who helped in that incredible rescue, I think we can call it, from Czechoslovakia. Thank you very much for being with us on the programme.